We can't keep doing this, I'm not a distant cousin anymore. I'm here, so, Actually, I like it. I like it. I like it. Makes me feel good. An old man feeling good. It's been a while, right? It's been a while. In fact, I think the last time I was here, I think that was like 6 or 7 pounds ago. I'm not sure, but I think so. I'm fighting the battle of the bulge all the time, Jared. Always fighting the battle. A better way to say it is I'm losing the battle of the bulge all the time. I don't understand why I can't lose weight. Am I the only one? I just don't understand why I can't lose weight. I work out. I work out 2 or 3 times a year, and I cut back. I've cut back to 2 or 3 desserts a day. But nothing works. Lots happened since I was here last. We hired another pastor, Pastor Kent. Thank God, right? It's time for Steve to retire. What's the man waiting on? I honor his service. You guys, some of you don't know he's a veteran. He was a veteran of the War of 1812. He was right there. And it's time. I don't even think he's here today. I don't like making fun of him when he's not here. Anyway. What do you guys want to talk about today? Anything? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we're in a series on the 10 Commandments, all right? And when I was in seminary, I went there with an intentional decision that I wasn't going to just learn from books and lectures by the professors. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to go and practice ministry while I was learning, because the cool thing about being in seminary is you've got experts that you have access to. All of my professors had PhDs or Doctor of Ministry degrees, and they had literally decades of experience. And I was very young and very stupid and naive, and I thought, if I can do some ministry and let these guys watch me and coach me and get feedback from these guys, it will make it worth my while to get this master's degree. So that was what I did. And when I heard that a fellow classmate named Pat Crowder was actually going to go out and plant a church, actually, you could see it from the campus. It was that close. I eagerly volunteered to be part of his launch team. And we did, and I served on his launch team for 6 months, and we planted a church that is still doing great ministry in Virginia Beach, Virginia now. And I loved that experience so much that I thought, well, why can't I do that, right? He did it. I can do it. Why can't I do it? And I went and talked to a couple of my professors, Dr. Howard Foltz, Dr. Owen Wilson, Dr. Joseph Umidi, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you guys think? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, where do you think I should plant a church? And they said, the biggest need in our area, in our region here, is in Norfolk, Virginia. In fact, there is a neighborhood in Norfolk that has the highest crime statistics in the city of Norfolk, and there's not a lot of churches going on there, and most of the churches are dying and moving away because of the crime. And they said, if you wanted to plant a church, we would back you. I said, let me do that. And I moved into the housing project in that neighborhood, one of the housing projects. And people would say, well, why are you doing that? You can plant a church from Virginia Beach, live in Virginia Beach, and plant your church in Norfolk. I don't think that was the way Jesus did it. Jesus came to us. He didn't say, hey guys, how you doing down there? He didn't live one place and minister another. He lived and ministered in the same place. So I moved into this inner city housing project in Norfolk, and everybody warned me about the crime. Everybody. In fact, my professors, even though they told me, this is a great place for you to plant a church, they all said, it's a crime. You're going to be careful. Be careful. When I moved in, the people in the housing project, in the apartment building said, man, there's a lot of crime around here. You're the only white boy for like 2 miles in any direction, And when I actually went and talked to the people in the city planners, they were excited that I was going to do it. So excited, they gave me a free apartment to live in. But they also said, be careful, it's a high crime area. And every time someone said, be careful, it's a high crime area, I would just smile at them and say, the Lord will take care of me. I lived there for 2 weeks, and guess what happened? On my 2-week anniversary living in that apartment, I came home and I was broken into, right? I noticed the door was ajar, the lock had been jimmied. I walked in, all of the cabinets were open, all the drawers were open. Someone had been rummaging through all my stuff, and it wasn't much stuff. I didn't have a lot of stuff there, but it's funny. Here's the ironic thing about that break-in. They didn't take a thing. I can can just picture these guys saying, dude, this guy needs stuff more than we do, you know? I literally had a mattress. I didn't have a bed. I had a mattress thrown on the floor. That's where I was sleeping. I did have a perfectly good operational boom box sitting on the kitchen counter. They didn't even take the boom box. And if you don't know what a boom box is, find somebody with gray hair and ask them. So I didn't lose any possessions in that break-in. I didn't lose a single penny financially, but I lost something. They stole something from me that day. You know, my sense of security. I mean, I grew up in Nutter Fort, guys. In Nutter Fort, locking your doors is optional. It's still optional, right? There's just no crime. No one had ever come into my house uninvited. And these guys had come in, rummaged through everything, and it just took away my sense of security. Now, if that happens to you, and I hope it never does, you're going to know what I'm talking about. It's a weird thing that happens inside of you when you know that you're that vulnerable to people taking your stuff, if you had some stuff to take, you know, which I didn't at that time. Why is it that instinctively, and I mean instinctively, we know, especially when it happens to us, right? Instinctively know that is morally absolutely wrong every single time it's done. Every time somebody comes into your home uninvited, it's wrong. There is no debate about it. There's no ifs or there's no gray areas. It's wrong. We know it's wrong because God wrote that law on our hearts. And just to make sure we didn't mess it up, he actually also wrote it on a tablet of stone in the 8th commandment. We've been looking at the 10 commandments over the last 2 months, and we're at number 8 right now. And number 8 is found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. This is long before, of course, thousands of years before alarm systems and security cameras and deadbolt locks. God gave humanity a simple command that protects every home, every community, every business, every family. He simply said, "You shall not steal." That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. It's written in our hearts. We know that it's wrong, especially when it happens to us. But we know it because it's in the commandments. It's one of the top 10. This commandment reveals that loving our neighbor means respecting his property enough that I'm not going to take his stuff. And also, I'm going to trust that he's not going to take my stuff. That's the power and the beauty of the 8th commandment, you shall not steal. Like all of the commandments that we're looking at this summer, the 8th one packs a whole lot of power and a lot of consequences and intentions in those few little words. In the 8th commandment, you shall not steal. Like, for example, one of the big ideas that comes out of this 8th commandment, you shall not steal, is this, and this is a big deal, man. Write it down if you're taking notes. This commandment validates the legitimacy of private property. Now, guys, this commandment does a whole lot more than condemn theft. It does condemn theft, but it does a lot more. It affirms something precious. It affirms that God recognizes the right of human beings to own things. And I do get it. I understand the psalmist said that the earth belongs to the Lord and everything in it. I get that. But you also see in the Bible that God actually goes out and gives things to people and tells us to possess them, tells people to possess them. We'll talk more about that later. So when you get stuff, when you earn stuff, the 8th commandment is there to protect it, and it legitimizes the fact that you should be protected and that your stuff should be respected. The 8th commandment is not merely about what we shouldn't do. It is also something that we should do. We should love our neighbor as ourselves. It's one of the big ideas behind all of these commandments from 5 on, right? It's all about loving our neighbor as ourselves. This truth has enormous implications, not only for our personal lives, but our economy, our community, our nation. It's huge. It's really big, and we're going to talk more about that later too. All right. There are examples of God backing this up. It's not just Exodus chapter 20, verse 15 that validates the legitimacy of private property. We read a story a few weeks ago when Pastor Lucas was preaching about Naboth's vineyard. You remember that story? Naboth was a guy who owned a vineyard. King Ahab wanted it. He wanted to buy it from him. Naboth wouldn't sell it because it had been in the family for so long. He wouldn't sell the vineyard. And what happened? Jezebel conspired to have Naboth murdered. And then when he was dead, they stole the man's vineyard. I mean, God did not like that. All right. And just in case you're not sure about that, here's what God said to Ahab in 1 Kings chapter 21. I have found you because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring disaster upon you. I will utterly burn you up. Now, when God says that, woo, you got to have, you've done something awful. And it was awful. It was awful that they stole Naboth's vineyard. And the whole book of Joshua is very interesting in regard to this. You know that there are literally 9 chapters in the book of Joshua, from Joshua chapter 13 all the way up and including Joshua chapter 21. 9 chapters where all God does is assign plots of land to the people of Israel. 9 chapters. You get this, and he gives them the boundaries of his land. You get this, and he gives them the boundaries of his land. 9 chapters where that's the only thing that's happening. So you get the idea that God really does believe that private property is a legitimate idea. The prophets spoke out against people who stole, even if they did have the power to steal, and that was the rule back in the day. The rule back in the day is if I'm stronger than you, I can take your stuff. If I've got the power to take your stuff, I can take your stuff. But God and the prophets said, no, 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 no. The prophets condemned those who seized the property of others. And here's what it says in Micah chapter 2. Woe, and that doesn't mean stop, that means you're in trouble. Woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it because it is in their power of their hand. In other words, they've got the strength to take people's stuff, and they take their stuff. They covet fields and they seize them, and houses and they take them away. They oppress a man and his house, a man and his inheritance. And God says through the prophet, woe to you if you do that. The major prophets spoke out about it. Ezekiel, he even told royalty. Back in the ancient Near East, if a king wanted to do something or a prince wanted to do something, they just did it. But God says, no, 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 no. Even royal family cannot steal people's stuff. Verse 18 of chapter 46 of Ezekiel. The prince shall not take away any of the inheritance of the people, thrusting them out of their property. He shall give his sons their inheritance out of his own property, so that none of my people shall be scattered from his property. Do you see a whole lot of ownership in that verse? There's a lot of ownership there. The prophet's saying, as the royal family, you own stuff. And if you want to give it away, you're welcome to give it away to your sons as an inheritance. However, you cannot take stuff from citizens to give to your sons as an inheritance. That will bring down judgment. Stealing is failing to love my neighbor as myself. When I was in my late teens and early 20s back in the 90s, I had a passion for photography. And now some of you have known me for a long time, but I bet you've never seen me with a camera in my hand. So you're saying, Pitts, what do you mean you had a passion for photography? I did. I had a serious passion for photography. Started when I was 16 years old. And in the 1980s, from 1981 until 1990, the minimum wage in our country was $3.35 an hour. And for the entire length of the 1980s, I worked 2 part-time jobs where I was paid $3.35 an hour. And during that time, I saved up enough money to buy camera equipment. I didn't have any credit card. I could whip out the credit card, and buy the stuff that I wanted. I had to save paycheck to paycheck. And I had to discipline myself not to go and eat with my friends at the Dairy Queen. I had to discipline myself not to go and spend money on movie tickets. I had to save money from every paycheck in order to buy the cameras that I wanted, the flashes that I wanted, the film that I wanted, the lenses that I wanted, and the cases and the tripods that I wanted. And by the time I was about, I would say this was 1986, 87, I had saved up and I had purchased over $2,500 worth of camera equipment, making $3.35 an hour. You do the math, that's a lot of labor. There's a lot of labor. And I had an awesome assembly of camera equipment. I love photography so much, I went out and I learned how to develop film. Film, if you don't know what film is, find somebody with gray hair and they will tell you. I learned how to develop it. I loaned all of my camera equipment to a church leader one day. And she said, I'm just going to take some pictures at the church, and then I'm going to leave the camera and all of your equipment locked up in the bookstore. We had a little bookstore there at the church. Locked up at the bookstore. Well, guess what happened? That night, somebody broke into our bookstore, stole every bit of my camera equipment. And I cannot tell you how much that hurt. Because whoever stole that did not steal just cameras and lenses and flashes. They stole years, literally years of my life and my labor that I had saved up to get those pieces of equipment. And it was it's such a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. And that's only happened to me. That kind of stealing has only happened to me like a couple of times in my entire life. So I've been very lucky. And probably all of us have experienced that. And you know the feeling in the pit of your stomach when you realize that they didn't just steal your stuff. They stole your labor. They stole your effort. They stole your discipline. They stole your sacrifice that you made to buy that stuff and get that stuff. They stole all of the future picture, thousands of pictures I do not have today because they stole my stuff. It took so much out of my heart that I never went and bought another camera the rest of my life. All the pictures that we have of our children, somebody else took them. Somebody else took those pictures. I didn't take any pictures because I wasn't going to go through that again. I could not go through again saving up money with the little bit of pay I was making and making the sacrifices to buy that stuff. It just sucked all the joy out of it for me. I did go out and buy a little mini, one of those handheld video cameras. I bought one of those and we got some videos. But all the future memories that I would have captured on film, they stole all that. And you know how that feels. We know that when that kind of thing happens, whether it's a family heirloom that somebody steals, or whether it's a vehicle that somebody steals, or maybe somebody who's stolen your identity. You talk about a scary thing when they steal your identity, or when they steal something off your porch that UPS has left there. We all know that feeling, and it is sick. And you all know that when that kind of thing happens, something in you rises up and says, you didn't have the right to do that. We all become constitutional scholars when somebody steals from us. It's all fun and games so you find somebody in your tree stand at deer season, you know. It's all fun and games until they don't bring back the rod and reel they borrowed, last year. And that, again, it's in our hearts, guys. It's not just something God said on a tablet of stone. He put it in our hearts. You shall not steal. Every society, every culture, every civilization in the history of man has condemned stealing because it's in our hearts. You can't do it. You shouldn't do it. Something else that we can unpack from you shall not steal. Another big important truth, if you want to write this down while you're taking notes, respect, this is important. Respect for private property is a cornerstone of human civilization and flourishing. Societies flourish when property is respected and protected. People work harder when they know that they're going to be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. People will start businesses when they know that they can enjoy the fruits of their labor. They will start factories. They will hire people to work for them and give them good paying jobs because they know they're going to be able to work and enjoy the fruits of their labor. When the eighth commandment is respected and the eighth commandment is obeyed. Let me just give you one tiny little example of that in action, okay? I was glad to hear we got a new pastor, Kent. He's here, since Steve's getting so old and everything. And I was happy to hear he's a backpacker. I'm a solo backpacker too. I love solo backpacking up in the mountains. And anyway, I decided last month I was going to go on this camping hiking trip. I decided on this trip I wasn't going to backpack. I wasn't going to carry everything on my back and set up a different camp, every 9 or 10 miles of hiking. Instead, I was going to set up a camp, and then I was going to do day hikes out and back from that camp. And the nice thing about that is you don't carry stuff around all day, right? The nice thing about that is I can get firewood, and I can create campfires for myself. I don't have to go out and try to find it. So I bought some. I was going to buy some. And I knew a guy in Whitmer. I was going up around Gandy Creek, Spruce Knob. I know a guy in Whitmer sells firewood, but he only takes cash. I didn't have any cash. So I stopped in Canaan Valley at a bank there. I knew there was an ATM. And when I pulled into the parking lot of the bank in order to get the cash out of the ATM, I looked to my left, and here's what I saw. I don't know if you can make that out or not, but that's a shed full of firewood bundled up. And there's nobody there. There's nobody attending it. There's no security cameras. There's no nothing. This guy had chopped up all that firewood, bundled it in nice plastic, heavy plastic, put a handle on it, and now he's trusting that people will respect the 8th commandment. He's trusting that when given a choice, people will purchase a product rather than steal a product. And he had a sign up. And the sign said, 1 bundle for $7, 3 bundles for $20. I took 3 bundles. I was going to be there 4 days. I took 3 bundles, and I didn't give him 20. I gave him 25 because I thought it was such a cool thing. That is just a tiny little example. But you take that out from the micro to the macro. That's why people start factories. That's why people start businesses. We've got that kind of thing going on right here in our church. The Northrops, they at least they used to sell farm eggs that way. They would just set them out, and if you wanted farm eggs, you go grab them, and then you'd leave cash. And then the Stutlers, they used to sell milk that way. I don't know, are they still selling milk that way? Does anybody know? You come in, you take your milk, and you leave your cash. I saw up in the same neck of the woods as Canaan Valley, I saw people doing that with baked goods. They put out pies, and you could, if you wanted them, you take it and just leave the cash. That's human flourishing, guys. In a tiny little scale, that's human flourishing. I got really good, high-quality firewood that I didn't have to work for, and I didn't have to find on the trail, and this guy got to keep almost all of the profit, because he didn't have to pay a teenager to sit there and monitor it, and he didn't have to pay for a bunch of high-tech security stuff to protect it. He just trusted that the 8th commandment would be obeyed and respected. Humans flourish where the 8th commandment is respected and obeyed. And the opposite is also true, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Here's some examples from the New Testament of people being generous with the stuff they own, all right? There's no place in the Bible, there's no place in church history where people were commanded to give money, forced redistribution of money. It's not in the Bible. It's nowhere in the Bible. What is in the Bible is a lot of encouragement, a lot of talks and sermons about being generous and giving to people. And if you live in a flourishing society, a flourishing civilization, you actually can make some money and you can be generous. Here's some examples. These are all New Testament examples, but there's examples in the Old Testament too. Voluntary generosity. The Good Samaritan story that Jesus told, it's a parable. It's not a real event, but it's telling that Jesus includes this story. And he says that this Samaritan found this guy, this victim of crime on the road, left for dead. He doesn't just help him out and dress his wounds. He takes him to the inn, and he tells the innkeeper, take care of him. This is Luke chapter 10, verse 35. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. That's generosity. Nobody's forcing that. Nobody's got a gun to the man's head saying, hey, you need to give money so that we can take care of people that are crime victims. He's just doing it. In Acts chapter 2, verse 44 and 45, all who believed were together and had all things common, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any who had need. We're going to talk more about this, but that's just a lot of generosity in the Jerusalem church right after the day of Pentecost. The Apostle Paul gets in on it in Ephesians chapter 4. He said it's not enough just to not steal. He says, let the thief no longer steal. That's obvious. But rather, let him labor, not just labor, doing honest work with his own hands so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. The Bible, especially the New Testament, talks a lot about voluntary generosity. Never, ever does it talk about forced redistribution, where you have no choice in it. What happens when we don't respect the eighth commandment? What happens when we don't respect private property as a legitimate thing? Well, families become poorer and governments become richer. And governments become more powerful and more controlling. In fact, write this down if you're taking notes. This is one of the aspects of this eighth command that we need to learn again, evidently, from some of the stuff that's going on in our country. Competing philosophies that do not respect private property produce human misery. That's one of the reasons that we should all be alarmed by some of the stuff that's going on in our country right now. We should all be alarmed by it. We've got people who haven't read a book, evidently, and have no context of history. They don't know what happened in the 20th century, evidently, that they're trying to resurrect socialism, communism, and Marxism here in our country. They're getting elected in our country. It's mind-boggling for anybody as old as me, because everybody in the 20th century that lived in America who had half a brain and could get an eye open knew that that was not a good idea. We all knew it. Why is it that nobody knows that anymore? Because when I was back in the dark ages, in the 1900s, when I went to school, we had this class in high school called civics. And we learned some of this stuff. And then when we went to college, we had this class called The History of Western Civilization or Introduction to Western Civilization. Both of those classes have gone the way of the dodo bird. They no longer exist. They were intentionally taken out by the colleges and the universities because the colleges and the universities have turned into Marxist factories. They just churn out Marxism, Marxism, Marxism. I am befuddled at why good Christian people who have a head on their shoulders would keep sending their children to these Marxist factories. I just don't get it. Send them to Liberty University where they're going to get a good education, and they're not going to get Marxism. They're going to get free enterprise capitalism taught. That's just my own personal bias. But nobody, think about New York City, just New York City as an example. This guy is a communist, Mamdani. He's a communist. And he wants private property to be done away with. Now, he can't go in there and force that right now. But think about this for a second. 20 years ago, who was the mayor of New York City? Rudy Giuliani. In 2 decades, we've gone from Rudy Giuliani to that Mamdani guy. Is anybody else alarmed by that? I mean, I am shocked. I'm literally shocked that this kind of stuff is happening. And if you think I'm overstating things, if you think that the communists are really, well, they've learned their lesson because it's never worked. You know, it never worked in Russia. It never worked in Eastern Europe. It never worked in Cambodia. It never worked in Vietnam. It never worked in South America. It never worked in Cuba. It never worked in China. Now, they are still calling themselves communists, but they had to inject free enterprise ideas into the communist China marketplace, or it would have gone down. About the same time the Soviets went down. If you think I'm exaggerating, this is Karl Marx. He's the guy that invented the thing, you know? Does anybody read books anymore? I don't know. Here's what Karl Marx said. The theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. The government in a communist country goes in and steals your stuff. It is, of course, a direct and clear contrast with the ideas of the Eighth Commandment. And oh, by the way, just good economic sense. If you go and steal everybody's stuff and take it as a government, and then you take the stuff from people that work really hard and earned their keep, and you give that stuff to people who won't work at all, what does that do to the man and the woman who've worked hard? Do they want to keep working hard? No. And that's exactly what happens every time communal living is tried, even when it's tried voluntarily. Even when it's tried voluntarily, it doesn't last, because people will not work for the fruits of their labors to be taken and given away to other people who won't work. They won't do it. And that's what is at the heart of communism and Marxism. They want everybody to have equity. You hear that word a lot today. Equity is everybody lives with this much income down here. You used to be up here, and then there are people that are here, and there are people here, but equity doesn't bring everybody up. Everybody goes down with equity. Guarantee it. If you think I'm not telling the truth, go to Cuba. It's only 90 miles off the coast of Florida. There are some rich people in Cuba. Guess who the rich people are? The Castros. They get money. The government people get money. Everybody else lives in abject poverty. There's no gasoline. There's no cars. Nothing. Because communism is so great. And you say, well, dude, I don't believe in communism. I believe in socialism. Friedrich Engels, who invited modern socialism, here's what he said. The abolition of private property has become the special mission of modern socialism. And they lie when they're running for office. They just lie. They just lie. Again, this is in direct conflict with biblical assumption that individuals may own property. And I'd say, Pitts. Come on, guy, come on. This is Sunday morning. Let's talk about the Bible. I am talking about the Bible. I'm talking about how the Bible applies, and if you are under the impression that communism, Marxism, and socialism is just a competing economic idea with the same moral equivalence as free enterprise, then you've got to reread the Eighth Commandment. You shall not steal. That includes the government. The government doesn't have the right to steal from you any more than anybody else. It is a moral evil. Marxism, communism is a moral evil. You go anywhere that it's been tried, and why the American people have said, well, let's try it, I have no idea. It's arrogance, mostly, of these people that are running for office. They think, well, yeah, it didn't work in the Soviet Union, it didn't work in Eastern Europe, it didn't work in Cuba, it didn't work in communist China, it didn't work in Vietnam, it didn't work in Cambodia, but that's because those people were dumb and we're smarter. We can run communism better than them. It's sad, man. It's really sad. And you used to not have to talk about this kind of stuff on Sunday morning because everybody knew. Everybody was taught civics. Everybody was taught free enterprise, capitalism in Introduction to Western Civilization. We were all taught it. Not anymore. You know, even during those early days of the church when people were giving their possessions to be distributed to those who had need, it was completely voluntary. Completely voluntary. Nobody was holding a gun to anybody's head and saying, you got to do this. And oh, by the way, it was completely temporary too. Very temporary. Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4 does display a little tiny bit of what you might call communal living. Because there was an emergency. If you remember what happened on the day of Pentecost. Anybody remember? On the day of Pentecost, the church grew from 120 people to over 3,000 people in one day, one afternoon. And a lot of these people lived in distant lands. They were there for the Feast of Pentecost. They stayed around because they wanted to hear more about Jesus. They wanted to learn more about their faith. And if it would be the same like if you and I, we've got, 1,000 people here on a Sunday morning. If suddenly 30,000 people showed up. That's the kind of emergency this was. And so people did. They sold their property. They gave the money to the apostles and said, just bless people. Just bless the people that need help. Take care of these guys and teach them about Jesus. They did that because there was an emergency. It was very temporary because by Acts chapter 12, we read this about Mary. Mary had a house. And the church was meeting. The Christians were meeting at Mary's house. She didn't sell her house. And you go and read the stories of Antioch and Corinth and Ephesus and Philippi and Rome. The Christian church exploded in those cities, but there was never one time, not one time, that they practiced communal living. Not once. Not even voluntarily did they ever practice communal living. You know what happened to the church at Jerusalem? They went into poverty. They went into poverty. Isn't that telling a little bit? A little bit telling? And some of that was because of persecution, but it was also because all of a sudden, all the wealthy people have given away their property. Their ability to create income has been given away, and now they don't have any way to create income, and poverty followed. Now you got the church at Antioch, Corinth, Ephesus, and Philippi having to come and bail out the Christians in Jerusalem because they didn't have any income. They didn't have any wealth. I think this is telling. Everyone loses when we give up the eighth commandment. Everybody loses. I got a quick story to tell you about that. In my little neighborhood there, when I was a kid, there was a man, older man, he retired, and he put out a garden every year. Big garden, not a fort, it was a big garden. And he would work at it. I mean, he would work in the hot sun. He would work in the evenings. He really put his heart and soul into his garden. And when it was all said and done, he would have literally bushels of product coming out of that garden. And it was just him and his wife, so they didn't have the ability to even eat half of it. And he would give it away. You would come home from someplace and there'd be a bushel of corn sitting on your front porch, or a bunch of apples, or a bunch of tomatoes sitting on your front porch. And he did this for years. And then one awful summer, a bunch of teenagers, probably after their first beer, you know how people act after their first beer, they went in there and they stole a bunch of his stuff and they vandalized the entire garden, just destroyed it. Guess what happened? He never planted a garden, not one more time. Not one other time did he ever plant a garden. Just like he must have felt like I did when they stole my camera equipment. I don't want to ever put my labor into something like that and not be able to enjoy the fruit of my labor. Everybody lost. Everybody in that neighborhood lost because someone didn't respect the eighth commandment. They didn't respect private property. If you want to see that working on a macro scale, all I've been talking to you about is micro, little tiny businesses here. You want to see how that works on a macro scale? Read Ayn Rand's book, The Atlas Shrugged. In fact, if you don't like books, they made that book into 3 movies. You can go watch all 3 movies and it'll tell the story of the book. But she grew up in a communist system. She knew firsthand how communism destroys the incentive of human beings to work. They don't want to work. And all that brings poverty. If you don't want to read that one, there's also a great book called On Plymouth Colony. William Bradford, who was the first guy that led the Pilgrims over here, they set up a colony and they immediately went into communal living. All this time, I've thought that the reason Bradford did that was because he misunderstood what was going on in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4. But William Bradford was too smart for that. It wasn't him that wanted the colonists and the Pilgrims living in communal living. It was actually the people who sponsored the colony back in Europe that were requiring them. They forced them to live in communal living. And guess what happened? There was never enough food. There was constant disease because people who worked hard didn't see the fruits of their labor. They took their food and they gave it to people who wouldn't work hard. And nobody prospered until 1623. And guess what happened in 1623? They got permission to do away with communal living. And they never had a food shortage after that. Because now men are willing to go out and work hard because they know they're going to enjoy the fruits of their labor. And not only did the men get involved in planting stuff and they were assigned certain plots of land, the ladies actually came out of the house and started working on the land too, because they knew that their children were going to eat the food that they produced. Jesus never, ever forced redistribution. He didn't. He never said anything about it. The early church did not abolish private property as the socialists and the communists want to do today. And they have a thing called liberation theology, which is nothing more than Marxism with a Bible verse attached to it. It's hokum. It's hokum. Instead, the early church sanctified property. They viewed the possessions not as idols, not something to cling to, not something to hoard. They also didn't see it as assets for the government to confiscate. The early church and Christians have always looked at them as gifts from God to be managed in a way that honors God and in a way that can also be a blessing to others with generosity. Jesus doesn't eliminate private ownership. Jesus sanctifies the hearts of the owners. Would you stand and receive this blessing? May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. God bless you all. Have a great week.